The first thing wrong with the emergency lockdown was that the human laughed. Not loudly. Not like a villain in one of those cheap Earth entertainment feeds. Just one short breath of amusement from the back row, soft enough that half the class almost missed it, and sharp enough that I never forgot it. We were in Survival Theory 3, Room 214 of the Varen Interstellar Academy, a classroom built for the galaxy's brightest young minds and, apparently, the galaxy's worst timing. Instructor Havek had been explaining hostile environment protocols for low-oxygen moons, which was ironic because 30 seconds later every student in that room forgot how to breathe. The door opened during the middle of his lecture. It did not slide with the polite whisper of Academy engineering. It unlocked with a hard metallic click, then drifted inward as if someone on the other side had convinced the security system to stop arguing. The lights above the frame turned from blue to red. The room temperature dropped 2 degrees. Every desk screen froze. A warning symbol appeared on the wall display, silent at first, then pulsing in slow crimson light. Restricted breach. Remain seated. Await authority response. That was what the text said. Nobody remained seated because text written by safety committees has never met actual fear. Varathi cadets lowered their crests. Quran students folded their outer limbs under their bodies. 2 aquatic exchange students sealed their breathing collars with shaking fingers. Instructor Havek stopped speaking mid-sentence, his teaching pointer still raised toward the holographic moon behind him. And then he entered. Tall, narrow, wrapped in a gray academy maintenance cloak that did not belong to him, face half hidden by an optical blur field. He carried no dramatic banner, made no speech, announced no glorious purpose. That made him worse. Real danger rarely introduces itself. It just steps into the room and lets everyone else understand too late. My name is Lyra Valen, and at the time I believed I was brave. I had scored in the top 3% in strategic analysis. I had trained under orbital pressure simulations. I had faced live tactical exams designed to make weaker students request transfer to botany. I knew how to identify threat angles, exit paths, crowd movement, and stress responses across 17 species. Yet when that intruder crossed the threshold, my body locked in place like a frightened child's. So did everyone else's. Everyone except Caleb Hayes. Caleb sat in the last row by the window, the human exchange student from Earth, wearing the academy uniform like it had personally offended him. He was 6 feet tall, maybe 185 pounds, pale-skinned, brown-haired, and annoyingly ordinary in every visible way. No armor plates. No fangs. No venom glands. No defensive spines. No heat shimmer. No obvious biological reason for confidence. He had spent the first half of class leaning back in his chair, spinning a cheap black pen across his knuckles while Instructor Havek described lethal terrain like it was supposed to impress him. When the door opened, I looked back at him because I expected fear. Honestly, I wanted to see it. Humans were supposed to be the Academy's fragile experiment, the soft Deathworld mammals who only sounded impressive in recruitment articles. Caleb did not look afraid. He looked inconvenienced. The intruder took another step into the classroom, and the security shutters sealed over the windows with a heavy thud. Someone made a small sound near the front row. Instructor Havek whispered for everyone to stay calm, which immediately proved that he was not. The intruder's blurred face turned slowly, scanning us one by one. His attention passed over the armored students first. Then the larger species. Then the instructor. Then it landed on Caleb. Of course it did. In a room full of horns, shells, exoskeletons, reinforced uniforms, and evolutionary warnings, the human looked like the easiest mistake available. Caleb stopped spinning the pen. He looked at the intruder. Then, before anyone could pray, scream, negotiate, or faint, the human smiled and laughed under his breath. The sound carried through the lockdown silence like a dropped coin in a church. Instructor Havek stared at him. I stared at him. Every student stared at him. Caleb set the pen down on his desk with careful precision and muttered, "You have got to be kidding me." That was when I realized something the Academy had failed to teach us. Fear does not look the same on every world. On Earth, apparently, sometimes it looks like boredom. The Academy had trained us for emergencies in the way wealthy institutions train students for danger: clean diagrams, polite alarms, controlled simulations, and instructors who always knew where the exits were. Room 214 proved in less than 10 seconds that training is not the same thing as readiness. The lockdown field sealed the walls with a low electric hum. Desk screens turned dark. The air vents slowed to emergency circulation. Above the door, the red warning light pulsed once every 2 seconds, steady as a heartbeat that did not belong to anyone calm. Instructor HFY lowered his pointer and took one careful step away from the holographic moon. "Students," he said, voice too formal, "remain still." That was when I knew he was afraid. HFY never used one word where 6 would do, and now he had chosen 3. The intruder tilted his head toward him, as if amused by the attempt at authority. His blur field shimmered over his face, turning his features into a smear of gray light. The maintenance cloak hung wrong on his frame. Too stiff at the shoulders. Too clean at the hem. A disguise chosen by someone who understood cameras better than classrooms. My analysis training finally started working again, far too late to be useful. Entry point compromised. Security response delayed. Instructor unarmed. Students cornered. Windows sealed. Only one door. One threat in the open. Possible second threat unseen. That last thought made my skin go cold. Then Caleb sighed. Not a heroic sigh. Not a dramatic one. The sound of a person whose day had become annoying. The human leaned forward, elbows on his desk, eyes on the intruder with the casual focus of someone watching a raccoon knock over a trash can. I did not know what a raccoon was then. Caleb explained it later. It did not make the comparison less insulting. The intruder noticed him too. "You find this entertaining, human?" His voice came through a throat modulator, flattened and metallic, but the contempt survived translation perfectly. Several students turned their eyes toward Caleb without moving their heads. I wanted him to stop smiling. I wanted him to lower his gaze like a normal prey species. I wanted the fragile Earth student to understand that whatever strange confidence he had brought from his death world was not useful here. Caleb Scrack, the Academy had trained us for emergencies in the way wealthy institutions train students for danger: clean diagrams, polite alarms, controlled simulations, and instructors who always knew where the exits were. Room 214 proved in less than 10 seconds that training is not the same thing as readiness. The lockdown field sealed the walls with a low electric hum. Desk screens turned dark. The air vents slowed to emergency circulation. Above the door, the red warning light pulsed once every 2 seconds, steady as a heartbeat that did not belong to anyone calm. Instructor HFY lowered his pointer and took one careful step away from the holographic moon. "Students," he said, voice too formal, "remain still." That was when I knew he was afraid. HFY never used one word where 6 would do, and now he had chosen 3. The intruder tilted his head toward him, as if amused by the attempt at authority. His blur field shimmered over his face, turning his features into a smear of gray light. The maintenance cloak hung wrong on his frame. Too stiff at the shoulders. Too clean at the hem. A disguise chosen by someone who understood cameras better than classrooms. My analysis training finally started working again, far too late to be useful. Entry point compromised. Security response delayed. Instructor unarmed. Students cornered. Windows sealed. Only one door. One threat in the open. Possible second threat unseen. That last thought made my skin go cold. Then Caleb sighed. Not a heroic sigh. Not a dramatic one. The sound of a person whose day had become annoying. The human leaned forward, elbows on his desk, eyes on the intruder with the casual focus of someone watching a raccoon knock over a trash can. I did not know what a raccoon was then. Caleb explained it later. It did not make the comparison less insulting. The intruder noticed him too. "You find this entertaining, human?" His voice came through a throat modulator, flattened and metallic, but the contempt survived translation perfectly. Several students turned their eyes toward Caleb without moving their heads. I wanted him to stop smiling. I wanted him to lower his gaze like a normal prey species. I wanted the fragile Earth student to understand that whatever strange confidence he had brought from his death world was not useful here. Caleb stood in the aisle with both hands visible, which should have made him look harmless. Somehow it did the opposite. The intruder had entered room 214 expecting fear, confusion, maybe a heroic instructor trying to negotiate from the front of the class. He had not expected a human student to stand up like the interruption had finally become worth his attention. "Sit down," the intruder said. Caleb glanced at his own chair, then back at him. "You just told me to stand up. I control this room. You control the door," Caleb said. "That is not the same thing." The sentence landed harder than it should have. I felt it ripple through the students around me. The door. The lockdown. The red lights. We had mistaken those for control because the academy taught us to respect systems. Caleb was watching the person. The intruder took one step closer, and the optical blur around his face shimmered as if his equipment did not like his breathing. He was angry now. Anger made him easier to read. Caleb knew that before any of us did. Instructor HFY finally found his voice. "Cadet Hayes, return to your seat." "That is an order." Caleb tilted his head slightly. "Sir, your orders are designed for students who are still part of the problem." HFY's crest tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means if everyone stays quiet and small, he gets to decide what happens next." Caleb's eyes never left the intruder. "I do not like that plan." Neither did I, suddenly. It was embarrassing how quickly courage can spread when someone else starts paying the price for it. My fingers loosened on the edge of my desk. A few rows ahead, the Quran student stopped shaking long enough to look up. The aquatic twins lowered their hands from their breathing collars. The room was still afraid, but the shape of the fear had changed. It was no longer a wall. It had cracks. The intruder noticed those cracks and hated them. "You think you are protecting them?" Caleb shrugged. "Mostly I think you talk too much." A few students made tiny sounds, not laughter exactly, more like disbelief escaping through locked teeth. The intruder's attention snapped across the room, and the sounds vanished. Caleb used that half-second to move his backpack strap off his shoulder. Slow. Casual. Careful. Not reaching for a weapon. Not making a threat. Just clearing his arms. I saw it because I was watching him now, really watching him. That was the first lesson Caleb Hayes taught me. Humans prepare in ways that look like nothing. The intruder pointed toward him. "Hands where I can see them." Caleb raised both hands slightly. "Empty palms." "Calm face." "They are right here." "Step forward." "No." The word was not loud. It did not need to be. HFY looked stunned. The intruder looked insulted. I felt my pulse jump so high my desk registered a stress warning. Caleb gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "See, that is another thing. You keep giving instructions like we are negotiating. We are not." The intruder's shoulders shifted. His cloak opened just enough for a dark metallic device to catch the red emergency light. I did not know what it was. I only knew every adult in the room reacted badly. HFY's eyes widened. The nearest students ducked lower. My own body tried to freeze again. Caleb's expression did not change. Only his gaze moved. Device. Hand. Elbow. Distance. Floor. Desk. Smartboard. Window shutters. Back to the intruder's feet. It was so fast I doubted I had seen it at all. Then he spoke. "Lyra." Hearing my name in the middle of that room nearly stopped my heart. I stared at him. Caleb still watched the intruder. "When I move, hit the floor switch under your desk." My throat went dry. "What floor switch?" "The one your academy hides under every third student station for lab containment resets." Instructor HFY whispered. "How do you know that?" Caleb's mouth twitched. I read the room manual. No one reads room manuals. No one's sane, anyway. But Caleb was from Earth, and I was beginning to suspect Earth had a different definition of sane. The intruder took another step. He was close now, close enough that the red light from the warning panel painted his cloak in harsh stripes. Last warning, human? Caleb breathed out through his nose, almost disappointed. You keep saying last warning. His right foot shifted half an inch. His left hand lowered slightly. His shoulders relaxed further, which made no sense until I realized he was not relaxing. He was loading the spring. Pick one, Caleb said. The intruder lunged. Not far. Not elegantly. Just enough to prove he had finally lost patience. Caleb moved at the same time, and the classroom stopped being a classroom. Not because anything dramatic happened yet, but because every alien eye in room 214 saw the same impossible thing. The human was already where he needed to be before the rest of us understood the threat had started. Caleb moved before the intruder finished moving, and that was the part my mind refused to accept. I had been trained to read motion in stages: intent, commitment, execution, recovery. That was the academic model. Caleb skipped the model. He saw the decision before the body caught up with it. The intruder reached into the opening of his cloak, and Caleb stepped sideways, not backward, sideways, slipping out of the direct line with the lazy precision of someone avoiding a puddle on a sidewalk. His hand caught the edge of the nearest desk, and he used it not as a shield, not as a weapon, but as leverage. The desk slid 6 inches across the polished floor with a sharp scrape. Not enough to strike anyone. Enough to break the intruder's step. Enough to make his balance lie to him. Lyra, Caleb said. Not shouted. Said. My body obeyed before my pride could argue. I dropped under my desk and found the recessed floor switch exactly where he said it would be. My fingers hit the panel. The classroom answered with a low thump as emergency lab restraints rose from the floor between the second and third rows, transparent containment rails meant for chemical spills and unstable experiments. They shot up and knee-height around the intruder, not trapping him completely, just interrupting the path he had already chosen. He stumbled against the rail and cursed through the voice modulator. Caleb was already moving again. Not fast in the flashy way training videos love. Fast in the useful way. Small steps. Quiet hands. No wasted motion. He hooked his backpack strap around the intruder's wrist, twisted the fabric once, and pulled just enough to turn the man's own momentum away from the students. The dark device slipped from under the cloak and skidded across the floor toward Instructor Havek's podium. Every cadet stared at it. Caleb did not. He was watching the person, not the object. Do not touch that, he said. Havek froze with one hand halfway extended. The instructor, who had spent 4 months correcting Caleb's posture, actually obeyed him. I would have enjoyed that more if my heart had not been trying to escape through my throat. The intruder tried to recover, but the containment rail blocked his foot, the backpack strap held his wrist, and Caleb's shoulder was already positioned at the perfect angle to guide him down without crashing into the nearby desks. It looked almost gentle, which somehow made it more unsettling. No grand strike. No roaring. No heroic leap over furniture. Just a human placing every part of the situation where he wanted it to be. The intruder dropped to one knee, caught between the rail and the desk line, and Caleb pressed one hand between his shoulder blades while stepping back out of reach. Stay there, Caleb said. The intruder snarled something the translator refused to process politely. Caleb looked unimpressed. That is not staying there. He pulled the backpack strap once more, and the intruder's arm folded into a position that made further movement inconvenient without causing obvious harm. It was humiliatingly efficient. The entire exchange had taken maybe 4 seconds. Maybe less. The classroom was still processing the first step while Caleb was already on the aftermath. I stayed crouched under my desk, staring at him through the gap between the seat and the floor. My hands were shaking. His were not. The red lockdown light painted his face in pulses, and for the first time Caleb Hayes did not look like a misplaced exchange student. He looked like an answer to a question the galaxy had been too arrogant to ask. Instructor HFY finally breathed. "Security is still 3 minutes away." Caleb glanced at the door. 2 minutes and 40 if they use the east stairwell. HFY stared. "How could you possibly know that?" Caleb kept one knee lightly against the desk, maintaining space, keeping the intruder controlled without turning his back on the class. "Because the elevator locks during red alert, the West Hall is closed for maintenance, and your security team runs like they are afraid of sweating." A cadet near the front made a choke sound that might have been laughter. This time, nobody silenced it. The intruder strained once against the strap. Caleb leaned down slightly, voice calm and almost bored. "I would not. You are already having a bad day." That was the moment I understood the laughter from the beginning. Caleb had not laughed because he thought the situation was funny. He had laughed because the intruder had entered a room full of frightened alien students, and assumed the soft-looking human in the back was the safest target. On Earth, apparently, that kind of mistake had a name. Bad judgment. The intruder stayed down, but the room did not relax. That was another thing our academy training had failed to teach us. A threat being controlled is not the same as a threat being over. Caleb knew that. I could see it in the way his eyes kept moving, not nervously, not wildly, but with a calm pattern that made my own thoughts feel slow. Door. Device. Students. Instructor. Ceiling vents. Back to the intruder. Then the windows. Then the door again. He was not celebrating. He was inventorying disaster. "Instructor," Caleb said. "Kill the smart board." HFY blinked as if offended by the phrase. "The teaching display?" "Yes, sir." The giant 12-foot screen connected to the same room system he somehow got through. HFY's crest flicked in alarm. He turned toward the podium, then hesitated near the dark device on the floor. "Do not touch that," Caleb repeated. "Use voice command." HFY swallowed. Classroom system, disable primary display. The holographic moon vanished. The wall display went black. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a thin green symbol flickered in the corner of the dead screen and disappeared. Caleb's jaw tightened. It was the first time I saw actual concern cross his face, and that tiny change frightened me more than the intruder had. "Everybody away from your desks," Caleb said. The room froze. He looked at us, and his voice sharpened by 1 degree. "Not loud. Never loud. Just impossible to misunderstand. Now." We moved. Chairs scraped. Cadets stumbled into the aisles. The aquatic twins helped each other over the containment rail. The Quran student nearest me crawled so quickly his uniform snagged on the desk edge and tore with a soft rip. No one laughed at him. No one even looked. I pushed myself up, trying to appear composed and failing completely. Caleb noticed without turning his head. "Lyra, front wall. Emergency manual panel. Orange cover." I stared at him. "Why me?" "Because you are closest, and you are not panicking as badly as the others." It was a generous lie, but I accepted it. I ran to the wall and found the orange cover hidden under the instructor station. My fingers were clumsy. The cover stuck. Caleb's eyes flicked toward me. "Pull down, then left." I did. It opened. Inside were 3 manual switches with labels I had never bothered to memorize. "Which one?" I asked. "Local power isolation." I found it. "Are you sure?" Caleb looked at the dark screen. The green symbol flickered again, longer this time. "No, but I am getting more sure about what happens if we do not." I pulled the switch. The room dropped into emergency battery light. Half the ceiling panels went dark. The hum in the walls cut off, and the sudden quiet felt physical. The dead smart board sparked once, not dangerously, just enough to make every cadet step back. The intruder laughed from the floor, breathless and ugly through the modulator. Too late. Caleb looked down at him. "People keep saying that around me." A thin seam opened along the lower edge of the wall display. Not part of any lesson system I knew. Not academy hardware. Something small began extending from inside the frame, unfolding like a mechanical insect waking up. Havek made a small horrified sound. That is not school equipment. Yeah, Caleb said. I picked up on that. He shifted the backpack strap to keep the intruder contained, then pointed with his free hand. Nobody stand in front of the board. The class scattered sideways. The device in the wall rotated, searching. Its lens flashed blue, then white, then blue again. It scanned the empty center of the room where we had been sitting seconds before. My stomach went cold. The intruder had not entered alone. He had brought the classroom itself with him. Caleb exhaled slowly. Okay. That is annoying. Annoying. He called it annoying. The same word he had used when the cafeteria ran out of coffee substitute. The same tone he used when his desk screen translated homework instructions into 4 different dialects of nonsense. The mechanical lens turned toward him. Caleb stood perfectly still. The red backup light painted one side of his face. The other side was shadow. For the first time, I understood that his calm was not ignorance. It was discipline with dirt under it. Earth had not made him fearless. It had made him functional while afraid. The lens locked on his chest. A soft warning tone began inside the wall, rising. Havek shouted, "Move!" Caleb smiled without humor. I was planning on it. Then he released the backpack strap, stepped onto the nearest desk, and moved upward instead of sideways. The device tracked too low. The intruder twisted in surprise. The class stared. Caleb caught the top edge of the smart board frame with both hands and pulled himself toward the wall like gravity was a suggestion he had voted against. His foot struck the manual release latch above the display. The entire hidden mechanism dropped into safety shutdown with a heavy clunk, folding harmlessly back into the wall. Caleb landed on the floor in a crouch, one hand down, breathing steady. The room remained silent. Then he stood, brushed dust from his sleeve, and looked at Instructor Havek. You might want to update the room manual. Caleb's joke should have broken the tension. It did not. It only made the silence stranger because now everyone in room 214 had seen 2 impossible things in under 1 minute. First, the human had controlled an intruder without turning the classroom into chaos. Second, he had spotted a hidden system threat faster than our instructor, our security architecture, and every expensive safety protocol the Academy bragged about during recruitment tours. The intruder on the floor had stopped laughing. That worried me. Anger talks. Fear breathes too fast. Silence calculates. Caleb noticed the silence at the same time I did. He turned his head just enough to look down at the gray-cloaked figure, but not enough to take his attention off the room. You are out of tricks, right? The intruder said nothing. Caleb sighed. I hate when they make me ask twice. Instructor Havek stood near the dark podium, rigid with embarrassment and delayed terror. Cadet Hayes, he said softer now. Security is approaching the hall. Caleb listened. Actually listened. His eyes shifted toward the sealed door, and his head tilted a fraction. I heard nothing at first. Then, faintly, through the thick academy walls, came the distant rhythm of boots moving fast. Caleb frowned. Too many steps. Havek blinked. What? Security team for this wing is 4 officers. I hear at least 7. My skin went cold again. The aquatic twins backed away from the door. A Koran cadet whispered something in his language that the translator politely refused to render. Havek reached for the classroom intercom, then remembered the local power isolation had cut most of the room's systems. His hand hovered uselessly over the dead controls. For the first time since I had known him, Instructor Havek looked like a teacher trapped inside a lesson he had not prepared. Caleb, unfortunately, looked prepared for that too. He pointed at me. Lyra, how many maintenance corridors behind this wall? I swallowed. 2. 1 vertical service shaft and 1 cable access crawlway. Can either fit students? The crawlway can fit smaller species. Not Korans. Not you. Caleb nodded. Good. Then we do not use it. Why ask? I said. Because bad options are still options until you check them. The footsteps outside stopped. Right outside. The door's red light blinked twice, then turned yellow. Someone beyond it had authority access. Or something that looked enough like authority to fool the lock. The intruder finally spoke, voice low and metallic. You should have stayed seated. Caleb looked down at him. You should have picked a different planet's exchange student. The yellow light turned green. Havok's throat sac tightened. Security would announce entry. Caleb stepped away from the intruder, but not toward the door. Toward the first row of desks. Everybody behind the lab benches. Now. This time, no one hesitated. Not even Havok. We moved in a low wave, students crawling, sliding, helping each other over rails and between desks. Caleb dragged the nearest heavy lab bench 6 inches to create a better barrier, and 2 larger cadets joined him without being asked. That mattered. A minute earlier, we had waited for him to save us. Now we were following him. The door unlocked. Caleb grabbed his pen from his pocket, looked at it with mild regret, and set it on the floor beside the bench. I stared at him. Why the pen? Because it rolls. That made absolutely no sense until the door opened. 3 figures in Academy security armor stepped inside. They looked correct at first glance. Helmets, chest plates, identification bands, shoulder lights. Then Caleb nudged the pen with his shoe. It rolled across the floor toward them, slow and harmless. The middle figure looked down. The other 2 did not. Real Academy security tracked floor movement as a unit. These 3 did not. Caleb smiled again, and this time it was not bored. It was confirmation. Not security, he said. The room inhaled as one organism. The fake officers raised their hands in the same instant. Caleb slammed his palm onto the manual containment reset switch built into the lab bench. Transparent barriers snapped up across the front row, dividing the classroom into sections. The fake officers were trapped near the entrance, separated from the students by a wall of clear emergency shielding. The sound was clean, final, beautiful. Caleb looked at Instructor Havok. Your room has great hardware. Havok stared at the barriers, then at Caleb. You activated a partial containment grid manually. Yes, sir. That procedure is not in the student guide. Caleb shrugged. It is in the maintenance appendix. The fake officers shifted behind the barrier, suddenly much less confident. Behind us, the original intruder groaned as the backpack strap kept him awkwardly pinned near the desk rail. Caleb stood between both problems, breathing a little harder now, but still calm. The Academy had called Earth a death world like it was an insult. I was beginning to understand it was a resume. Caleb glanced at me, then at the rest of the class. Nobody moves unless I say so. No one argued. Not the instructor. Not the elite cadets. Not me. Outside the barrier, one fake officer struck the glass with an armored fist. The shield held. Caleb looked at him, then at the clock on the dead wall. Real security should be here in about 40 seconds. The fake officer struck the glass again. Caleb did not blink. 38. That was when I realized the human was not just surviving the room. He was running it. 38 seconds can be a lifetime in a classroom that has stopped pretending to be safe. The fake officers stood behind the transparent barrier near the entrance, their armor lights flashing official blue over faces hidden by Academy helmets. The original intruder remained pinned near the desk rail, breathing hard through his modulator, no longer performing confidence for anyone. Between them stood Caleb Hayes, one human exchange student with a torn backpack strap, a missing pen, and the expression of someone waiting for a slow elevator. 32, he said. One of the fake officers pressed a palm against the barrier and tried an override code. The shield flickered once. Every student behind the lab benches flinched. Caleb did not. Instructor, manual lockout on the containment grid. Havok snapped out of his stunned silence, and looked at the controls under the bench. That requires faculty authorization. Then authorize faster. Havek's crest rose, offended by tone even at the edge of disaster. Then dropped again when the barrier flickered a second time. He slammed his hand onto the faculty plate. The shield brightened from clear to pale gold. Caleb nodded. Thank you, sir. That tiny courtesy in the middle of a crisis made no sense. Then again, neither did most human behavior until 5 seconds later, when it became obvious and humiliating. The fake officer at the center turned his helmet toward Caleb. You are not leaving this room. Caleb checked the distance between the barrier and the students. I was not planning to. I have class. A sound moved through the cadets behind me. This time it was almost laughter. Not because anything was funny, but because Caleb had made the room remember it was still a room. Desks. Lessons. Students. A teacher. A ridiculous human who treated danger like an interruption, not a destiny. The fake officers hated that. They had come to frighten us into stillness. Caleb kept turning stillness into time, and time into options. 24, he said. The barrier control beeped. One of the fake officers had begun cutting access through the outer panel with a compact tool hidden in his glove. Not dramatic. Not loud. Efficient. Caleb saw it at once. Lyra! I looked up from behind the lab bench. Yes? Do you trust me? My first honest answer would have been no. My second honest answer would have been I do not know. What came out was, apparently. Caleb smiled without taking his eyes off the barrier. Good enough. On my mark, hit the room lights. We are on emergency battery. Exactly. I stared at the manual panel beside me, then understood. The classroom's emergency battery did not power everything equally. If we cut the remaining lights, the transparent barriers would automatically increase internal glow for evacuation visibility. A simple safety feature. A blinding one if you happen to be staring through the shield. I placed my hand on the switch. Ready. The center fake officer's tool sparked against the access seam. The barrier dimmed at the point of contact. Caleb raised one hand. Mark. I killed the lights. The classroom plunged into darkness for half a heartbeat, then the containment barriers flared bright. Gold from floor to ceiling. The fake officers recoiled, their helmet sensors overloaded by their own reflected glare. Caleb moved at the same instant, not toward them, but toward the original intruder. He kicked the drop-dark device gently, sliding it under the nearest lab bench and out of reach, then tightened the backpack strap around the desk leg with 2 quick loops. The intruder tried to rise. Caleb leaned close and said something too low for the translator to catch. Whatever it was, the intruder stopped moving. 12, Caleb said. The Real Academy security team arrived at 10. We heard them before we saw them, 4 sets of boots, not 7, moving with coordinated weight. The door controls flashed white. A real security voice called from the hall. Room 214, identify status. Havek opened his mouth. No sound came out. Every student looked at Caleb. So did the instructor. That was the strangest part. The adult in the room, the decorated survival theorist, waited for the human student to answer. Caleb raised his voice. 3 hostile actors contained, 1 possible device secured under front lab bench, students behind containment, no medical emergency confirmed, do not breach the center barrier until helmets are verified. There was a pause outside. Then the security voice answered, noticeably more respectful. Copy that. The fake officers lowered their hands. The original intruder went still. The classroom remained bathed in golden emergency light, every face turned toward Caleb Hayes. He looked at the clock on the dead wall, then at Instructor Havek. Real security was early, Havek whispered. By 2 seconds. Caleb nodded seriously. Good department. And that was when the room finally exhaled. The real security team entered like professionals, which means they did not waste time trying to look impressive. 4 officers in verified academy armor moved through the doorway in a tight formation, scanned the fake officers, confirmed the barrier integrity, and then looked at Caleb for the second time because apparently the first look had not made the situation any easier to believe. I did not blame them. From their perspective, room 214 contained 3 hostile actors, a disabled hidden device, a sealed classroom full of elite cadets, 1 speechless instructor, and a human exchange student standing in the middle of it all like he had just finished rearranging chairs before lunch. "Cadet Hayes?" the lead officer asked. Caleb raised one hand slightly. "Yes, ma'am." "You are the one who issued the status report?" "Yes, ma'am." "Are you injured?" Caleb looked down at himself as if checking for a missing assignment. "No, ma'am." The officer stared for a beat longer. "Of course not." I heard the words because I was standing close enough, and because the room had gone quiet in that new way again. Not fear quiet. Aftermath quiet. The kind of silence that arrives when everyone knows they survived something but no one has agreed how to speak about it yet. Security secured the fake officers first, then the original intruder, then the device under the lab bench. Caleb gave clean answers when asked, short and plain, no boasting, no dramatic version, no mention of the fact that all of us had looked to him before we looked to our instructor. That made it worse. If he had bragged, I could have put him into a familiar category. Arrogant. Reckless. Lucky. Human. Instead, he acted like what he had done was simply the correct response to a badly managed interruption. Instructor Havok finally recovered enough pride to stand straight. "Cadet Hayes," he said, trying to sound authoritative and not like a man whose lesson plan had been outperformed by a student with a backpack strap. "You will submit a full written explanation of how you knew the room systems." Caleb glanced at him. "Sure." Havok waited, perhaps expecting apology. Caleb added, "The manual was poorly organized." One of the security officers turned away very quickly. I am almost certain she was hiding a smile. Havok's crest stiffened, but he said nothing. That was wise. The classroom had watched him freeze and watched Caleb move. Authority still belonged to the instructor on paper, but paper had not saved us. The lockdown lifted in stages. First the window shutters opened, letting pale afternoon light spill across the desks. Then the containment barriers lowered. With soft mechanical sighs. Then the wall display rebooted into a cheerful Academy logo, as if it had not recently tried to become part of a disaster. Students rose slowly from behind the lab benches. Some helped each other stand. Some checked their breathing collars, their uniforms, their trembling hands. I remained still for a moment, watching Caleb retrieve his pen from the floor. It had rolled under the front row during the chaos. He picked it up, inspected it, clicked the tip twice, and slipped it back into his pocket. That tiny action bothered me more than the rest. The pen mattered to him only because it had been useful. Not sentimental. Not symbolic. Useful. Earth, I realized, had taught its children to treat anything as a tool if the room went wrong. A desk. A strap. A light switch. A manual. A joke. Even fear. Caleb turned and found me staring. "You okay?" he asked. I almost said yes. That was the polite answer. The Academy answer. The answer of a cadet who did not want to look weak in front of a human she had underestimated for weeks. Instead, I looked at the place where the intruder had first entered, then at the lab bench, then at Caleb. "I am revising my opinion of your species." He nodded. "Fair. That is all you have to say? You were pretty wrong." I should have been offended. I laughed instead, one sharp startled sound that made 3 nearby cadets look at me like I had broken protocol. Maybe I had. Maybe that was the point. Across the room, Instructor Havok faced the blank smartboard. His pointer was still on the floor where he had dropped it during the first minute. He picked it up slowly, looked at the lesson title still saved in the system, Hostile Environment Survival Theory, and then erased it. No one spoke while he typed the new line. Classroom Rule 1. If the human laughs first, reassess the threat. The words appeared in bright white across the wall. Caleb stared at them. That feels targeted. Havoc did not look back. It is educational. For the first time since I had enrolled at Varen Interstellar Academy, the entire class laughed together. Quietly at first, then more openly, the sound shaky and alive. Caleb looked embarrassed, which somehow made him seem more dangerous, not less. Before that day, I thought Earth had sent us a fragile exchange student with strange jokes and poor respect for classroom seriousness. I was wrong. Earth had sent us a survival expert disguised as a teenager who read maintenance appendices for fun and treated danger like a problem with steps. The Academy had taught us that Deathworlders were biologically unusual. Stronger endurance, strange pain tolerance, unpredictable stress response. Useful facts. Incomplete facts. Caleb Hayes taught us the missing lesson without ever writing it down. Humans are not terrifying because they do not fear danger. They are terrifying because when danger enters the room, they notice the hinges, the lights, the floor switches, the timing, the exits, the mistakes, and then they laugh because the threat has already started losing.